The 49ers did it. Now the Browns should too. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. The Cleveland Browns should take a page of the 49ers book and bring in a new kicker as soon as possible. Also, the recipe for beating the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday. It's going to be a tall task. Plus, Lance Reisland stops by to talk about a little bit of what he liked from week one, whether or not Quinshon Judkins could be ready for week two, and also how to beat the Ravens. I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making this your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers that bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. The 49ers on Tuesday parted ways with their kicker of the last 3 years, Jake Moody, and brought in Eddie Pinheiro as their new kicker after Moody missed a field goal on Sunday and had another kick blocked on Sunday. And I think the Browns should be following suit here. I just think you can't afford when you're the Browns and your margin for error is as razor thin as it is to win football games, as we saw on Sunday. You cannot afford to have a kicker out there that is a liability. And you know what's interesting is, like, if the 49ers with Moody was one of the best kickers in football a couple of years ago. I mean, he was 84% on field goals in 2023. He was 60-61 on PATs that year, went 2 of 3 from 50-plus yards that year. Like, he was a pretty solid kicker. He was a reliable kicker for them when they made that run to the Super Bowl that they made the last time they made a run to the Super Bowl. And then last year took a step back, and then Sunday was rough. And so the 49ers decided it was time to move on in the same way that the Browns decided it was time to move on from Dustin Hopkins before the 50 when the roster needed to be cut to 53 players, because he had a rough year last year and then continued some of that into the preseason. But I just think that the 49ers are you know, it's not like week one overreaction type stuff here from the 49ers. They understand they can't afford to have a kicker that's going to miss kicks for them. They played a close game that they did win. They eked it out but it was closer than they probably would have liked because their kicker missed two kicks in Jake Moody. And so they don't want to risk losing other games because of it. And I understand where, like, again, it's week one. You want to give a guy a chance. I think their situation's a little bit different in that Moody's more of a veteran. And so he just wasn't getting it done anymore. So it's easy to move on. And I understand where there's probably some prevailing thought here that, well, listen, Andre Szmyt, it was his first NFL game. Why not give him a chance to go out there and see if he can redeem himself in week two? I get it. In most like in other situations, I think I'd understand that as well. But I think the long tortured history of this team looking for kickers, combined with the fact that the Browns, as I said, just have a razor thin margin for error, I think you got to bring somebody else in, even if it's still give Andre Szmyt a chance this week to be the primary kicker, but you add somebody to the practice squad. I don't think that's even at least a reasonable idea to, you know, just add some competition and add somebody to the room to see if you have other options. And maybe that person is Jake Moody, frankly, because I understand he's struggled of late the last year plus, but even somebody like Jake Moody, like sometimes kickers, I use this analogy with defenses all the time in the NFL, but kickers are also like bullpens in baseball, where year to year things can just be so different. We experienced that here in Cleveland with Dustin Hopkins, obviously, and I think the 49ers obviously experienced it with Jake Moody this past year or so. And so maybe a change of scenery helps. Like sometimes a guy in a bullpen goes to a different team and all of a sudden he's lights out and he's back to being dominant again. Like, you just never know. So I'd be willing to explore it with him. I mean, I also think it's interesting, like Hopkins is still out there as well after he was released by the Browns at 53-man roster cutdown day. Now, what's interesting with Hopkins is bringing him back is probably something that they won't do because it's basically then an admission that they shouldn't have cut him in the first place. And I'm not saying like Dustin Hopkins is going to be automatic. Like last year was a disaster for him. Ever since the Texans game in 2023, where he hurt his, I think it was his quad, or his hamstring, trying to chase down the returner on a kickoff, he just hasn't been the same. And so I'm not saying that like keeping Hopkins would have changed, the outcomes long term, or that it was going to be the perfect solution. Clearly, there's something missing with him and his mechanics or whatever, and he's just off a tick, and something wasn't right. But I don't know that the organization is going to preach trust with Andre Szmyt, because they're going to preach trust with all their guys. But I think you saw on Sunday, like, it's going to be hard to trust this player to execute for you, and that's a problem. And when, again, you're a Browns team that has limited resources on offense as is, you're sort of learning on the fly with a lot of young guys. You're trying to win while rebuild. Sunday was a perfect example of like how the Browns are generally going to have to win games this year. And if it comes down to a kick or two or a play or two, you don't want your kicker being the reason that you don't win a game. That happened in week 1. It could happen theoretically in other weeks if you don't have a kicker that you can rely on. It's just mind-numbing how this organization hasn't been able to figure that position out since 2012 when Phil Dawson was last year. And that year was even controversial that they didn't retain him after that season even longer than his career had already been to that point. And so, I don't know. It's crazy, but I think you keep taking bites at the apple here because you can't afford to lose games that way. And like I said, I don't know. Like, I think the way to sort of balance this would be, sure, you go into week 2 with Andre Szmyt being your kicker, but adding somebody to the practice squad feels like at least the obvious thing to do this week, to just kind of add another body there, create a little bit of a competitive environment for the kicker that's already on the active roster, and be on your merry way. It doesn't appear that they did that. They didn't work anybody out the last couple of days, so it feels like they're standing by Andre Szmyt. But another bad game, and yes, he could bounce back and hit everything next week. We'll see. But another bad game or another misser here or there, and I do think their hand is going to be forced. They're going to have to reconsider it, even though I think they should be reconsidering that position already. Because if one team's out here doing it after week 1, why can't you? And I get it. They're trying to instill some confidence in the guy and stand by him, but there's no guarantee that that's going to work out for you. And I guess we're going to have to see how that goes in week 2. But a rough start for Andre Szmyt, and one that would have me, at least if I was running the team, looking for other options to at least bolster the room behind him via the practice squad or whatever it might be. Speaking of the Ravens, it's going to be a tall task. They just put up 40 points in a loss to the Bills on Sunday night. But I think that what you saw from week 1 from the Browns is kind of the recipe to beating the Ravens too. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. They have over 280,000 parts of plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, with their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. You need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery, which means if you got a project that cannot wait. I'm talking to you home buyers, or homeowners rather, like myself, who out of the blue, something happens, something pops up. The home issues always pop up at the most inopportune times. Well, guess what? You can get the parts that you need fast. Talk about a game changer. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com and sign up for free. Use our code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's no better place to be than in the stadium, surrounded by fans, your friends, and family cheering on your favorite team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can always be a hassle. Between the keys and login screens and prices jumping to check out, it's a frustrating experience. I get it. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time became my go-to app for buying tickets just last year. I kid you not. I was buying tickets for my wife and I to go see Ohio State, Michigan. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best prices, plus all the fees are included. So the price you see when you select your tickets is the price you pay at checkout. I pulled up Game Time, and in a couple tabs, I saw amazing deals. You can too. I'm talking about tickets to your favorite NFL games for as low as $100. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, so the key to beating the Ravens is not trying to be the Ravens if you're the Cleveland Browns. And what I mean by that is you can't turn on the tape from that Sunday night shootout with the Buffalo Bills and think that's how we're going to beat the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to try to get into a shootout with them. The Browns are just not built for those types of games at this juncture. Now, I know Joe Flacco can throw for 300 yards with the best of them still at his ripe old age of 40. I know that he just did that this past weekend. He was at 290. And it almost worked to winning the game in your favor. But how many points did they actually put up in the end? 16, with the possibility to put up 20 if you count the missed PAT and the field goal. And I guess you could have theoretically said like they could have scored more as well if there wasn't a couple drops on certain plays. I get that. But you're not going to win a game against the Baltimore Ravens trying to win a shootout, because I've said it before. I'll say it all throughout the season. That's just not how the Browns are built. They're not a team that is like this juggernaut offensive team that's going to run and gun and move up and down the field quickly and can score on you in a hurry. And so I honestly think the game plan should be relatively similar to what we saw this week against the Bengals. And that is, you want to force methodical drives from them, long, drawn-out drives up and down the field, eat up a lot of clock, and have long, drawn-out drives yourself. And what's interesting is, like, Kevin Stefanski on Monday talked about the idea that wasn't actually like their game plan coming in. They didn't plan on making it this possession style game where the teams are going to kind of go back and forth with these possessions and have longer drives up and in the field and eat up a bunch of clock. I mean, the first two drives of the game, the Bengals touchdown drive and then the Browns touchdown drive, you were essentially like 3 minutes into, or you were a couple minutes into the second quarter. Like they took up the entire first quarter with 2 drives plus. And then next thing you knew, it was already almost halftime. Like it was absurd how quickly those 2 quarters went. And that's what you want to do. You don't want Lamar Jackson to have the ball in his hands for extended periods of time, or not even extended periods of time, because that's fine. That's the exact type of thing I'm talking about. You want to make him work to score points, make it hard for him to get up and down the field within the offense, and you don't want to make it so that he's getting the ball back in his hands a lot, able to do a lot more damage, able to get more possessions and create with obviously his athleticism and all the athletes that are in that offense around them, between Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Bateman, Mark Andrews, the list, Isaiah Likely, the list goes on and on and on. And so I think that you sort of try to replicate what you did this past week. And the biggest difference is you just hope that your offense can do a little bit more this week, and that your kicker can make his kicks this week, going back to what we just talked about in the first segment. That's the big thing that you want to do. And listen, that's not impossible. I want to make it clear, like, the Ravens are a juggernaut, yes, but within this division, we know that anything can happen on any given Sunday. These teams know each other well. Fluky things happen all the time. The Browns quite literally just beat the Ravens last year on their home field when the Ravens were coming in red hot at that point, riding high after like a nice win streak, and the Browns spoiled it with the shootout game they got into with Jameis Winston last year at the helm. Again, I still believe that you can't win like that this year, and that you don't want to try to win that way against Baltimore. And maybe it turns out to be that way, because even 2 years ago in 2023, we all remember the Deshaun Watson, arguably his best game as a Cleveland Brown, where in the second half, he came out and the offense was just rolling and they were going up and down the field. There was the pick six from Greg, or the pick from Greg Newsome, and all those different things, like the caravan play where everybody was blocking downfield to kind of keep the sticks moving with, I think it was Jerome Ford on that play who was running the football. Or no, it might've been Kareem Hunt, either way, but regardless, just those are the moments that you think back to when you get in these matchups between AFC North teams, where it's like, well, they probably shouldn't win this game, but there's always a shot because AFC North football tends to be more rugged and it tends to be a little bit more sluggish, and it's not always shootouts that way. And so I think that's what the Browns need to kind of hope happens on Sunday when they face the Ravens in Baltimore for the first time this season, is drag this game into like a dogfight. Make it a back alley sort of brawl where it's rugged and dirty and Lamar Jackson can't just like run up and down the field on you and air it out up and down the field on you, and you're going to make their life difficult. And the Browns certainly have the personnel to do that. Defensively, we saw what they did this past weekend to Joe Burrow. They made life difficult for him. They had 3 sacks in a row to end a possession with a punt and go 3 and out late in that game in the fourth quarter. Lamar's a little bit harder to contain, but what I like is like Myles Garrett saying things like, hey, listen, that he was asked last week, can anybody get away from you? And he said, no, not this year. And he takes pride in trying to sort of limit the damage from Lamar Jackson at times. And he knows it's a challenge, but this defensive line, I think, is built for it as long as they don't get too far upfield and create lanes for him to sort of run him. But if you can contain him and limit the damage, which they've done to Lamar before, absolutely, they can stay in this game and make it more interesting and close. Which is why I think I'm not necessarily saying the Browns are going to win, but there certainly is room to believe that they could if they play the same style game they played last week. I think you replicate what you did last week to try to beat this team. And frankly, I honestly think that's going to be the game plan for most of this season against teams that the Browns are going to go into these games feeling like they're probably overmatched against anyway. So they got to actually execute it. They got to be able to consistently do it week to week. I'm sure there'll be some dull weeks where the defense isn't on its A game, and they'll have to try to win in a shootout. That's not going to be the recipe for success in most cases, though, for this Browns team. And so, and I think that certainly says that starts this week with a Baltimore Ravens team that's going to be extra motivated. I mean, face it, like they have to be beside themselves upset and frustrated and angry that they lost that game the way they did, up 15 to the Bills in week 1. And Derrick Henry is going to be running even more aggressively than he normally does. He's going to be mad as hell because he had the fumble that cost him. Like there's going to be a lot of troubling, not troubling, but there's going to be a lot of reasons that the Ravens are highly motivated in this game. And it kind of stinks the Browns are it would have been better, I think, if they had won that game and maybe come in like right. That always seems to be when the Browns get the better of the Ravens, is like when the Ravens get a little ahead of themselves and they're like, hey, we're feeling ourselves, we're good. And then the Browns can kind of sneak in and remind them like, hey, we're a division opponent. Can't forget about us. I think this kind of has the makings for being like maybe a one that gets away from Cleveland because of the results from week 1 and how motivated I think the Ravens are going to be to win it. But that doesn't mean they can't make it interesting. That doesn't mean that they can't, in a division matchup, make it difficult for the Ravens to do what they want to do. They certainly, like I said, have the personnel to do that, especially on defense. It's going to be about whether or not the offense can do more than it, even a little bit more than it did in week 1, and maybe put another touchdown on the board and at least the field goal that Schmidt's missed. Then you're talking about a team that ends up putting up essentially, 27 points. Like that gives you a shot in any game, I think, to win most weeks. If you can do something like that, great. If you can make your kicks, great. But I do think the game plan, it stays the same from what you saw against the Bengals in week 1 to try to pull off an upset against one of the best teams in football this year and clearly a Super Bowl contender in the Baltimore Ravens. So Cleveland travels to Baltimore Sunday. We know that. We'll talk to Lance Reisland about that same thing, the game plan to beating them. And we know Quinshon Judkins is due back at practice on Wednesday and for this week. Can he be ready to go in time for Sunday? Lance gives his perspective on it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. There's nothing better than following an NFL season with FanDuel. And frankly, the best part is they have options for however you want to bet. Maybe you're a prop bet guy and you want to bet a player eclipsing a certain benchmark in a game. Or maybe you want to combine that player benchmark with a few others and do a same game parlay. Maybe you throw a money line in there as well. Or you can just jump on the money line in real time as the action unfolds live. The options are endless, and it makes you feel like every game matters, whether it's your team playing or not. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, some final thoughts here with Lance as we look back on Browns-Bengals and look ahead to Browns-Ravens. And Lance, the first thing I want to get to beyond just kind of the play breakdown stuff we did was how involved these rookies were in this offense on Sunday. I mean, it was evident, both on the defensive side of the ball with Carson Schlesinger and Mason Graham, but on the offensive side too. I mean, Dylan Sampson led the team in catches, or he was tied with Jerry Jeudy, I think, for catches, but still. Or no, actually, he had more catches, but Jerry had a few more yards than him when it was all said and done. Harold Fannin was not too far behind. He was like the second leading receiver or the third leading receiver on the team. And how they used Harold Fannin in particular, I thought was really interesting because they had him playing quarterback at one point. They had him in the slot. They had him outside. They had him as a fullback. They were using him in an abundance of ways. And I'm curious, like just how impressed you were, what you thought of these rookies getting involved so early and their impact that they're going to have on this season.
Well, obviously, you talk about the guys everybody talk about defensively. Mason Graham and Schlesinger were outstanding. Schlesinger is an elite football player right now. I don't care how old he is; he's elite. And yeah. I had a feeling Graham would be better. Everybody's word early on, but Graham's a wrestler. He's a state champ wrestler. Played at Michigan. When the pads go on, those guys, there are no tougher humans in the world than wrestlers, and I really mean that. And as a football coach for a long time, wrestlers just have a different mentality, and he's an elite wrestler at 320 who has elite movement skills. So when the pads go on, so he's going to get a lot of one-on-ones, and he's even going to get better as he starts to understand how these offensive linemen are trying to block him. Fannin, so example, that last play that we showed, the Tillman touchdown, that was 12 personnel, right? You had Njoku outside, you had Fannin. Now, when Junkins gets back with his heavy body, that'll be even better. Now, I thought Sampson, like you said, he runs – you and I have stood next to him. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he runs a lot tougher than I thought. He broke a lot of early tackles. He runs really, really hard. I worry more about him just survival because he's not a huge guy, and that's hard to do in the NFL with those big guys. But I expect him and Junkins to be really, really good. Fannin is an elite guy. Fannin's doing everything that you and I talked about in Philly. He's playing all over the place. And when you can play all over the place, that last play is a great example. So the Browns are on the 5 to 7 yard line and they go 12 personnel. Well, you're going to run in 3 linebackers if they're in 12 personnel. What do? You go empty, right? Now you got a matchup. Now you're going to put Jeudy and Njoku down at the bottom. They panic immediately. The Bengals panic and put their safety over there to help, which puts guys in conflict, right? And that's kind of what that personnel grouping does for the Browns. It creates conflict for that defense of what personnel we're putting in and who are we covering. And I thought that play was great. These rookies are impressive, and I look forward to seeing what Junkins can do as well.
Yeah, Fannin was awesome in particular. Obviously, Sampson was as well. I think you saw what Sampson's role is supposed to look like once Junkins is officially out there. But seeing Fannin get moved all around and how much of a contributor he was, I was trying to tell people from a fantasy football standpoint not to sleep on Harold Fannin Jr. I was like, get your Harold Fannin Jr. stock while you can, because I knew he was going to be heavily targeted in this offense, and that was certainly the case on Sunday. You mentioned Junkins. Chance he plays this week. We know he signed his contract. The Browns kind of have this roster exemption right now where he gets to practice for a couple weeks if they want to, but he can't play in games until they get somebody else off the roster. So that could come as early as next week. He's going to be sort of cramming 4 weeks, 5 weeks of practice from training camp and all that into a week span. I'm assuming he's been working out and all those different things. But Lance, more from a standpoint of like once he's out there, how much more does he give this run game? Because the run game was a struggle on Sunday. Clearly, like it was obvious. They averaged just like two yards per carry as a group. The running backs actually only averaged 1.9 yards per carry. And Judkins, to me, feels like one of those backs that can sort of be an eraser. Like when there's a missed block or something, he can make a guy miss and still make something happen. So how impactful do you think he can be in helping this run game be better than it was in week one?
Well, you're right. So that was my biggest concern coming out of the game, just a lack of movement up front. So more than the backs, Spencer, I think the lack of vertical displacement on their double teams, and I still think they're getting back to those double teams like they ran a couple years ago. And this was the first live action for 4 quarters. But those guys inside didn't create the type of movement that I still think they're going to create as they continue to get back to this offense. It's like timing with a quarterback and receiver. It takes a little bit of time to match up those doubles, but they did not have great movement, and that's part of it. But like you said, because Junkins is 200 plus pounds, he can move the pile a little bit. Now, Joe Flacco throwing the ball 45 times is too much. So everybody talks about him being a game manager. He was the offense, and he did a great job. And obviously everybody talks about when is, Dylan Gabriel getting it. And I'm a Dylan Gabriel fan, but if Joe Flacco gave them the best chance to win, that offense was all him, the last Sunday. But I think what Junkins is going to give them is, first of all, they ran those plays at Ohio State, inside zone, outside zone, power, counter. That'll be like riding a bike. Backs know where that's going to be. He'll have to adjust to the speed a little bit, but that'll be easy. The learning curve will come with pass protection, right? He's got to make sure he understands who he has in what personnel groups against what fronts and blitzes. And that all comes from experience and reps. So I would expect to see him on running downs with simple pass protection rules where he's got the mic or he's got, whoever that may be, and just let him run and don't let him overthink until he gets everything down. When you want him in the game, you either want him as a decoy or a guy who's running with his hair on fire downhill, trying to get it, as I've said to you and others 1,000 times, get it to second six. Second six, this Browns offense can be pretty successful.
So off of that real quick, you think there's a chance he could play Sunday because just because like conceptually, like him running the football is not the issue. It's just about sort of developing some of those other things. So do you think we could see him potentially on Sunday?
Yeah, I think if you get him in there, I think he can have some touches as a running back.
Yeah.
Once again, a running back, power is power, counter is counter, wide zone is wide zone. Everybody blocks a little bit differently, but the aiming points, the landmarks, who's got the doubles, those are things he learned at Ohio State. When you play at a place like Ohio State, you learn those things. So I do not think that he would struggle getting in there and running some of those initial. I think where he would struggle is if they had him out there on third down and he had to pick up an exotic blitz because it's 3rd and 9. But early on, I think he can get out there, and I think he can. Obviously, the game speed and his conditioning and things like that are probably going to be in question. But to say that he couldn't have 5 to 7, 8 carries, I don't think that would be out of realm. Maybe in the red zone, things like that. But I do think he can contribute just because that's like riding a bike. He can do those things.
I know you've already started to look a little bit ahead to Baltimore, Lance. What did you notice about them from that game against the Bills, other than the fact that their offense is pretty damn electric and has a lot of options? And what are the Browns going to have to do to try to, go toe-to-toe with that team and actually beat them and get a win in the win column for the first time this season?
Well, whether we like it or not, they have the formula of how they win games. They got to shorten the clock. They got to keep it out of these elite offenses' hands. They got to rely on the defense. They got to punt the ball when necessary. They got to play good special teams, which they did not. They played good offense and they played good defense, but they lost special teams. And you got to win. Special teams is we always say is a phase you got to win, or it's got to be a non-point, right? It's equal both teams. It means no one makes any plays, and that's what you want. And usually in the NFL, teams who lose special teams usually lose the game. It's usually a wash, right? And then whoever wins on offense and defense. The Ravens are really, really good, but I think you got to keep the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands, and you got to make him. They like to run a lot of zone read type stuff where they get extra blockers, and he's reading that backside end. They got to make sure they make him give. And as good as those backs are, as good as the offensive line is, you live and die with him giving. So I look for a lot of times they're looking to make the quarterback run. This is an opposite week, right? So you're going to see those ends upfield trying to contain Lamar Jackson, make him give on some of those things. Then you got to find an answer for Zay Flowers. They're good at the tight ends. They run the ball well. There's not a lot of weaknesses in this team, especially on offense. So I think the best way to do that, best way to fight that offense, keep it away from them a little bit and run the ball, shorten the clock, be boring. Wins aren't boring. Everybody says that's boring and conservative. That's not conservative. You do what you got to do to win. And for the Browns to win, they cannot get in shootouts with these elite offenses. That's
well said. Yeah, they're not going to win games that way. You're right about that. And I thought Kevin Stefanski did a good job on Sunday of like having a feel for the game, like how it was playing out. It was very methodical, long drives, as you mentioned. And if that's how they have to win, like him being able to sense that and not try to do too much, I think is going to be key. We'll see if they can do that. We'll see if they can replicate that on Sunday. But In the meantime, another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining Lance and I to talk about your favorite football team. I can tell you we'll be doing this every single week. We might have different iterations of how we break down the plays. We're sort of looking into that, but I love the fact that we're getting to do this, and I hope that you will enjoy every episode that Lance and I do together, where we're talking through some of the X's and O's and things that went well and whatnot throughout the season. So if you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. For your second listen, remember that you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. For Lance Reisland, I'm Spencer German, and I'll talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.